What's going on, bottom line viewers? It's Mitch here to give you my starts and sits for fantasy football week number 5 of the 2020 NFL season. Before I give you my favorite starts and my least favorite matchups, my sits for week number 5, make sure you do Gronk spike the like button and subscribe to the Bottom Line View for more fantasy stardom and situm each and every Thursday. Also, comment your opinion on fantasy this week, your big plays of the week, your least favorite matchups, and also let me know your fantasy start and sit questions for week number 5. Let's kick off the starts and sits, as we always do, with another week starting at the quarterback position. My quarterback starts for the week: Teddy Bridgewater versus the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons are allowing the most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season, a league high 32.5 fantasy points per game, lit up each and every week. A lackluster pass rush and a very bad secondary. This game is expected to be a shootout in Atlanta between Bridgewater and Matt Ryan. Bridgewater has looked pretty good, pretty efficient, and he has plenty of weapons to take advantage of a pretty bad secondary in Atlanta. Daniel Jones, yes, Danny Dime season, baby. The Dallas defense, do I have to say anything more? They're horrendous. They might be the worst in the NFL. And this is also, get this, Jason Garrett revenge game. You heard it here first. Danny Dimes versus the Cowboys. Big Ben Roethlisberger is also a start this week versus the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles have allowed the two good quarterbacks they faced, or at least mediocre quarterbacks, in Joe Burrow and Jared Goff, over 20 fantasy points. Don't get fooled by the easy matchups they have had versus Haskins and the great Nick Mullins last week. That may fool you from a statistic standpoint, but Big Ben has been very good this year, over 300 yards per game. I think he'll light the skies up versus the Eagles in this one. Gardner Minshew, he's a top 12 fantasy quarterback right now. And really, if you take out that 1 week where he kind of sucked versus Miami, he's been amazing for you for fantasy purposes, and you can still pick him up right now if you like. He plays the Texans in a divisional game that is expected to be a shootout versus Deshaun Watson. I like Minshew in this matchup. I think he could put up multiple touchdowns. He's, of course, going to give you a few scrambles every game and some solid yardage. So Gardner Minshew, if you need a quarterback this week, maybe you have Cam Newton and you need to pick somebody up, I'd go with Minshew. My quarterback sits: Carson Wentz versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers defense is one of the top 3 in the NFL. They have a phenomenal front 4, which will get after Carson Wentz and cause Carson Wentz to get sacked and potentially turn the football over. Wentz has not been good under pressure, has been inaccurate without pressure, and now he's facing one of the best defenses at disrupting quarterbacks' rhythm. I really just don't like Wentz this week. I don't know why you're starting him at all. Maybe you have a little hope now that after that Niners game, he's going to be great. This isn't the matchup for him to be great. Joe Burrow versus Baltimore. I've loved Joe Burrow this season, and he's come through pretty big. But versus Baltimore, Baltimore has a strong defense, specifically in regards to their aggressive blitz scheme. The Cincinnati Bengals have a bad offensive line that is going to allow Burrow to get hit a lot. This might be a rough game for the rookie. That's why I am fading Burrow in week 5. Jared Goff versus Washington. Similar reasons to Burrow. Goff is not good under pressure, and Washington has a very good front 7 that was all over Lamar Jackson in week number 4. They can dominate the line of scrimmage. I think they will hit Goff. They'll force Goff to make mistakes, and Goff is coming off a game versus the Giants where he really let you down. Baker Mayfield versus the Colts. Don't get too excited about his game versus the Cowboys. He now plays the defense that people are calling the best in the NFL. They are leading a lot of different defensive categories right now, are the Colts. And Mayfield, this is just not a plus matchup. I expect them to keep the ball out of Mayfield's hands, giving it a lot to Kareem Hunt this week. I expect Baker to have one of his worst weeks of the season in terms of passing yardage and pure passing totals. My running back starts David Johnson versus Jacksonville. I like David Johnson not only because of the matchup. Jacksonville has allowed the 8th most fantasy points to running backs this season, but also 2 other reasons. New coach. Romeo Crennel is a defensive coach. He's very old school. I believe he's the oldest coach in the NFL right now. Oldest coach ever, 71 years old, something like that. So he's going to want to keep the football on the ground to keep his defense rested and off the field. It's an old school mentality, but he's going to do it. And that means David Johnson's going to get the football. And I believe this game will be higher scoring, regardless of what the Texans do. If they pass it or they run it, they'll have success. I think Johnson could score touchdowns in this game. Not just 1, but possibly even 2 in this game versus Jacksonville. Gibson versus the Rams. The Rams have been fairly average versus running backs this season, but the thing I really like about this game for Gibson is Allen is the new quarterback who is notorious for just dumping the ball to his running back. I mean, Christian McCaffrey set, a reception record last year because Allen just continuously dumped the ball down to him. And this is the same offense that he was a part of last year, so he's already familiar with it. And then you look at the game script that could be a part of this game versus the Rams. The Rams are potentially going to be up, which means Washington needs to throw, which means Gibson's on the field and he's catching passes and really putting up the receiving totals. Damian Harris versus Denver. Denver's run defense is pretty good. I believe they're actually 3rd best versus running backs this season. So on the surface, it's not a great matchup, but I do think if you're weak at running back, Harris is going to get plenty of work. He had 17 carries last week. He's going to get around 15 total carries this week, maybe a catch or 2 through the screen game. I just see him as replacing Sony Michel as this main ball carrier in the New England backfield. If Cam is playing, he's certainly a start in my opinion, because that means he likely will score a touchdown. If Cam is not playing, it probably means he gets more carries because there's no quarterback taking away the extra carry or 2. So I like Harris as a potential flex option, especially in standard or half PPR formats. And then the 49ers running back, specifically Jerick McKinnon versus Miami. The Fins have allowed the 7th most fantasy points to running backs this year. The 49ers are, let's say, angry after losing their game versus the Eagles, and they can really run the ball versus Miami. I think Kyle Shanahan's going to have a game plan that just absolutely gashes this Dolphins defense. Running back sits, let's start off with Mr. Montgomery in Chicago. I really feel like Montgomery, although you're probably going to start him in a lot of your leagues just because of the pure touch count and the snap share where he had like 85% of snaps for Chicago last week. His ceiling is just very low in this matchup. Tampa Bay is 2nd in rushing yards allowed per game. They are also 8th best versus running backs in fantasy this year. I just don't see the high ceiling. Now, if you're just looking for a solid running back 2 to get you a floor and maybe catch a couple passes and get a few carries, then Montgomery is going to do plenty fine for you. But if you're stacked at the position, I would keep Montgomery on my bench. Henderson versus Washington. Washington, like I said, has a dominant front 7. They are one of the top teams facing running backs this season. And the thing with Henderson is 39% of snaps, last week. Malcolm Brown out-snapped him last week, which is not good. Burkhead versus Denver. It's unfortunate for you guys that picked up Burkhead. Hopefully you played him before he went off in that one matchup versus the Raiders. You probably didn't, although you might have if you were a James White owner. Regardless, Rex Burkhead is just not going to see the same amount of work. James White is back. He is going to be relevant in the backfield as a receiver. And of course, Damian Harris has taken the Sony role. So Burkhead is kind of back into his normal role, which is supplementary runner and receiver, and that's not really fantasy relevant. Melvin Gordon is the final running back sit. He plays New England, and New England is the 7th best team versus running backs this season. They have done a very good job versus very good running backs. They have limited Chris Carson, Josh Jacobs, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire in 3 of their 4 games thus far, so I don't really see Gordon doing much, especially if Phillip Lindsay is back in the fold. My wide receiver starts Justin Jefferson versus Seattle. Jefferson, this rookie just looks incredible. He's making big plays. He's not just the slot receiver we thought coming out, but he's separating, he's going down the field, and kind of their new Stephon Diggs. He's playing a defense that, I've said this stat many times, but it's true and it's just amazing. Seattle has allowed the most passing yards in NFL history through 3 games. I'm not sure what the total is or where they rank through 4 games, but through 3 games, regardless, they suck at defending the pass, flat out. And Jefferson should thrive versus a very weak secondary in a game where their defense is bad and they're going to have to throw to keep up. CeeDee Lamb, this guy's becoming a start every week. He has become the number 2 option in this passing offense. The Giants secondary is not good, especially considering that Lamb is going to see the number 2 or the number 3 corner in this game, which, I mean, the Giants number 2 and number 3 probably don't even start on a lot of teams in the NFL right now. So Lamb is going to eat. Gage versus Carolina. I said this, I'll say it again. It's going to be a shootout in Atlanta. And considering Julio is hurt and Calvin Ridley's also dealing with injuries, Gage seems like a promising start in this game. Now, there are other receivers becoming interesting in Atlanta that are going to play as well, so watch out for that. But if you're desperate, I see Gage as a potential swing of the fences, big-time ceiling play in week number 5. Marquise Brown versus Cincinnati. If he can't get it going versus Cincinnati, I give up. I'd immediately trade him. Cincinnati doesn't have a terrible secondary, but again, Baltimore needs to get their passing game going, and there is not a better start or spot for that to happen than Marquise Brown versus Cincinnati. My wide receiver sits this week. Let's start off with Jerry Judy versus New England. I understand Gilmore isn't playing, but J.C. Jackson's also a top 10 corner, and Jonathan Jones is also a beast at the nickel. So regardless of who he sees, he's still going to have a tough matchup, and New England is just known. Bill Belichick takes away that number 1 option in the passing game. That will be Judy, and the Broncos' young rookie will struggle. A.J. Green versus Jacksonville. Or sorry, not Jacksonville. A.J. Green, I messed this graphic up. My bad. A.J. Green versus the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens have Marlon Humphrey. Marlon Humphrey's a stud, okay? Marlon Humphrey is a stud. And Marlon Humphrey right now is playing like maybe the best corner in football. He's at least in the top 3. He's a big physical press corner who shuts down opposing number 1 receivers. And that is A.J. Green. A.J. Green no longer has the speed to beat a guy like Marlon Humphrey or to threaten him. He is all about body position. He's all about possession catches. And that's not going to happen versus Marlon Humphrey. I'm sorry. T.Y. Hilton, he does not play Chicago. I messed both of them up because I've just kept A.J. Green and Hilton on this graphic. I'm going to be honest with you. They are not startable right now. They're old. They don't look as good as they used to. And regardless if Hilton is playing Chicago or now he is playing Cleveland, he's now going to see Denzel Ward, right? And Denzel Ward is also a top 10 corner in this game in man-to-man. And he has the speed to keep up with Hilton down the field, the quickness to keep up with him underneath. Rivers and him have not really had a great connection, so I would sit Hilton for another week. Just until he does something, I'm not going to start him. And then we have a correct graphic here with Landry versus the Colts. Landry of the Browns plays the Colts, and Landry really hasn't been fantasy relevant. The only receiver that's been relevant has been OBJ, who went off last week. I would temper my expectations on Odell versus this elite defense, but Landry is the one that I would sit. Landry has just not been involved enough in a run-heavy offense in a game that I expect to not be necessarily high-scoring, not low-scoring, but somewhere in the middle. Both teams want to run the ball. I think that means less time on the clock. It's going to be more of a ball possession kind of game. I would probably sit Landry. I don't see any upside in him right now in fantasy. My tight end starts, Evan Ingram versus Dallas. Ingram has had plenty of opportunity. He is playing plenty. He just needs to produce. And versus Dallas, Hooper produced last week, who was really struggling before that. Maybe this is the get-right game for tight ends. Evan Ingram could do that versus the Cowboys this week. You have Dalton Schultz versus the Giants. On the flip side, the Giants, they're weak at linebacker and safety in coverage. Schultz has thrived in the middle of the field thus far in taking over for Blake Jarwin. I think he can do that again. So if you're in a position where you need a tight end, Schultz is your guy. Eric Ebron versus Philly. This might be a blow-up game for Eric Ebron. He's already looked pretty good in spots for the Steelers, but he might prove to be a number one tight end all year long in this matchup versus the Eagles. The Eagles are the worst team versus tight ends. Kittle just absolutely wrecked them last week in his comeback game, and Ebron could score a touchdown here, maybe even have 80 to 100 yards. Hunter Henry versus New Orleans. New Orleans is the second worst team versus tight ends this year. Henry is a very talented player, and you're probably starting him just each and every week now with Justin Herbert in the fold. They're passing more, they're passing for more yards, and they're more dangerous in the passing game in general. My tight end sits, Austin Hooper versus the Colts. Hooper had a good game last week, but I would not expect that this week. The Colts are very good at linebacker, and they're very good in defending the middle of the field. Hooper is a possession receiver who, if he does not give you a touchdown, he is not relevant. I don't see him being relevant this week. Gesicki versus San Fran. San Fran is one of the best teams versus tight ends this year. They're good at limiting that because of their speed at linebacker. Gesicki is a glorified receiver playing tight end and is known for his leaping ability and speed, but San Francisco matches up perfectly with him in this game. Hayden Hurst versus Carolina. The matchup isn't terrible, but Hurst has not been relevant enough. He's not catching enough passes. He's not getting targeted enough. He's not utilized enough. So I'm sitting him right now. Jimmy Graham versus Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay's defense is tough. They have really good linebackers. Antoine Winfield Jr. at safety is playing great. Whitehead at safety is playing great. They've just played really well at versus tight ends because of their ability at safety and at linebacker. And my defensive starts this week. The Rams versus Washington. Washington's offense sucks. I don't care who the quarterback is, but Allen is known to fumble the football and just give it away on a silver platter. That could happen this week versus the Rams. And the Cardinals versus the Giants. The Cardinals defense is not great, but the Giants, or not the Giants, my bad. The Cardinals versus the Jets. The Jets. Oof, rough week for the... I should sit my graphics this week. That's a good idea. The Cardinals versus the Jets. The Jets... offense is the worst in football. There's no other way to put it. Adam Gase is a complete dummy, and the Cardinals' defense isn't great, but they're good enough to slow down this lackluster especially with Joe Flacco playing quarterback. The New England Patriots versus Denver. Denver, I don't know who's playing quarterback. I don't think it matters. Even without Gilmore, they will dominate. They even dominated the Chiefs last week, so I'd expect them to get back on track with some turnovers, some sacks, maybe even a defensive score. Who knows? There you guys go. Thanks for watching. Fantasy starts and sits for week number 5. If you enjoyed, Gronk spike that like button and subscribe for more fantasy starts and sits each and every Thursday. Leave your questions in the comment section below, and I will be sure to answer them right away if it's for the Thursday night matchup or on Saturday for the rest of the games. There are some games that have been rescheduled to Tuesday and Monday, so make sure you check that out as well. It's Mitch of the Bottom Line View. Thanks for watching. Peace.